Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Bob Ritchie. He's the Chief Technology Officer at SAIC. Bob, good to have you with us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Tom.
And our topic today is cloud, artificial intelligence, DevSecOps, and those seem like different things at once. But when you talk to the government, and this goes back to the foundation of the cloud era, the first uses of cloud were to create development environments that you could kind of rent with a credit card and all of those. We've come a long way since then. And yet cloud and now AI as an application and SecDevOps still get mentioned in the same breath. You decided at SAIC to do a survey to find out what exactly is going on because cloud is ever moving like the real clouds. Tell us about the survey. What did you ask and what did you find?
Sure, thanks, Tom. So first and foremost, the survey really centered, and how it was different, was it centered around the federal government in that we didn't survey commercial customers, we didn't survey state and local customers. It was really narrowly focused in on getting some statistical analysis on where the federal government is with adoption of cloud and specifically multi-cloud, and then DevSecOps and uses of artificial intelligence and machine learning for outcomes across the federal government. And some of the interesting corollaries there is that the reason we see that they end up being interrelated is that they're enablers of one another towards those mission outcomes. So in the case of leveraging the cloud and the elasticity and the resiliency of the cloud and the ability to move fast, we see organizations across the federal government such as the Department of Defense and specifically our work with Air Force on the DoD's program called Cloud One. Mm-hmm. We see those that adopt the cloud to drive mission outcomes are able to take advantage of it and move up the stack in terms of focusing on a cultural change of DevSecOps and then getting to a data-centric security posture that leads to leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning, even in sensitive enclaves of data and at different classification levels.
Well, that's a whole lot different than lifting and shifting so you can close a data center, isn't it?
Absolutely. And as you pointed out, some of the original kind of, forays into cloud for a lot of the federal government was in the R&D space and in the development-only space. But as Agile kind of started to take hold, and we were really trying to tie as both a defense industrial base and a federal industrial base and the federal government to tie mission outcomes to agility, meaning we are going to focus putting our money, what's going to drive the most outcome for the federal government. We started to see that disconnect between what was going on in the development side versus what's going on operationally had this really tough divide to cross. Now, on that front, DevSecOps and the ability to automate a lot of that workload has a direct correlation in terms of who is adopting and embracing cloud for the highest level of outcomes, almost the most cloud maturity. And then you add a layer on top of that, when I mentioned earlier, multi-cloud. It's really about enabling these federal organizations to have the right tool for the right job. These organizations are so diverse in their needs, ranging from things like HR systems and business systems, financial systems, all the way up to command and control structures, command and control systems, and even weapon systems, to have that ability to connect and provide the right tools to meet those mission outcomes. It only through leveraging an ecosystem with multiple cloud environments as well as software as a service, which is in and of itself one of the cloud delivery models, was the only way these outcomes could be achieved.
And let's talk more about Cloud One, what's going on there, and their mission is pretty clear, to defend the skies, et cetera, et cetera. How does the cloud enable that? What's different from when they had data centers?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my favorite parts about DoD's Cloud One and working with the Air Force and Space Force and other DoD combatant commands in that space is it really personifies how cloud is a journey, and cloud maturity and multi-cloud maturity is a journey. So what started out as on that end of the journey, focusing on how do I leverage cloud for more efficient and optimal and resilient business systems in the DoD, like any other organization. Department of Defense has HR systems, has financial management systems, has procurement systems, obviously logistics systems, et cetera. And how could they be more efficient at maintaining those systems so that their money could go towards winning the next fight and staying on the competitive end of defending our nation and our ideals? We were able to work together over the last 8-9 years to really evolve and take that kind of construct of first a foray into a single cloud provider, then expanding to a second between AWS and Azure, and now across 4 cloud providers on Cloud One to allow the best of Oracle to meet ERP systems, the best of GCP and Google Cloud Platform to meet the AI/ML capabilities, while still maintaining that kind of core construct in AWS and Azure up to higher classification levels, has allowed us to evolve from what used to be a web app-centered business cloud to now a full-scale weapon system enabling cloud ecosystem.
And before we get to what's required to be able to actually manage a multi-cloud environment, like having lots of data centers, only somebody different owns each one, let's talk about AI in the cloud in the context of those early business systems that you mentioned. It strikes me that if you can put AI applications to the data around those systems, you can get a lot of efficiency and reduce the operation of them and the man hours required to operate them, and make sure that they operate accurately. If it's a procurement system, there's 300 clauses that have to be in each contract, or which ones can we leave out here, et cetera, et cetera. Those kinds of things can be automated so that you get the benefit of not just having it off-premise, but also squeezing it down in terms of the effort and money it takes.
Yeah, no, you're touching on one of the, I guess, the biggest misnomers of cloud is that cloud in and of itself is going to save money or drive this efficiencies. And leveraging the cloud as someone else's data center won't get you there, right? But taking advantage of the opportunity to move to cloud and actually transform the way you do business, to take advantage of automations, both in how you deliver and execute systems, embracing Agile and embracing a culture of DevSecOps, but to your point around automating actual business processes and business functions and getting to a position of decision advantage is really where we see in the commercial space cloud being leveraged to the fullest extent. And that's really where the more mature multi-cloud organizations and AI/ML organizations across the federal government are starting to broach. What might have started out as robotic process automation over the past 4 or 5 years, how do I automate monotonous routine activities, right? Back office things that no one wants to, every day I pick it up from pile A and I put it down on pile B, getting that level of automation to free up those brilliant folks across the federal government to think further up the stack, all the way through to actually having trained and supervised models integrated to help not only automate process, but optimize process and really change process in a way that's still governed and structured thanks to the DevSecOps kind of security that's baked in.
All right, and then let's talk about the multi-cloud aspect of this, because clouds are not the same. They're really not commodities. And if you look at the service catalogs of each of the major cloud providers, there are thousands of different offerings they have. Agencies have to decide which ones from which ones to use. There's compatibility issues if you want cloud portability. So there seems to me there has to be something between the agency and these multiple clouds to, I don't know, abstract all of this or integrate all of this?
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and that's where SAIC has kind of stepped in with 2 kind of components to what we call the broader ecosystem of CloudSend, which is really our multi-cloud, our framework for the multi-cloud journey across federal organizations as well as commercial, but really homed in on that kind of federal use case. We have within that framework that kind of starts with exploratory understanding where a federal organization is at, whether at the macro level or even at the microsystems level, to automated migrations into the right cloud ecosystem, all the way to sustained operations in an automated way. So that kind of journey of explore, migrate, operate is then underpinned by continuous security that helps drive rapid and continuous authorities to operate, as well as continuous innovation. So how do we have on-ramps for those pockets of great ideas across federal organizations so that we're not bogging it down with this prescriptive governance hierarchy that's preventing innovation? Because really that's going to be the key to not falling into another existential cliff in terms of operations and maintenance cost. But more so to that point, in being able to go on that journey with that CloudSend framework and CloudSend ecosystem, there are tools along the way that help accelerate. So we have premier partner tooling, whether it's SaaS or PaaS, that we integrate into that framework to help assist, as well as use the tools that an agency already has at its disposal. For example, at the Department of State, we've been able to partner together to bring the fullest out of the ServiceNow platform from an IT service management perspective, as well as Microsoft 365 integration, so that we have the best performance and Office requirements met across leveraging a SaaS platform in that regard, as well as then leveraging more of the general purpose cloud fabric of both Microsoft and AWS.
Mm-hmm.
bringing that together to meet the holistic aspect of the mission.
I was going to say that's a big question, because you might like a ServiceNow application, and really ServiceNow doesn't make a big deal about what cloud they happen to be hosted in. None of the SaaS people do, the SaaS people do. Microsoft, probably in Microsoft clouds, just as a good guess. But if you need to integrate those two tools, or any combination of tools that you mentioned, we're talking about ServiceNow and Microsoft, but whatever they are, then somewhere behind what the customer sees is those actual cloud hardware. I mean, whose cloud it is. That's where you have to make sure that things can get integrated, sounds like.
Absolutely, yeah. And but not only integrated, but integrated in a secure way. And so this is when we kind of look up the stack into a zero trust networking architecture and think about components as data-centric security instead of network-centric security. To kind of embrace the fact that, as you point out, ServiceNow is living in an opaque cloud environment. We don't see where it is. We don't see which cloud it's living in. At the same time, I might have some Salesforce, from a citizen-facing, citizen relationship management aspect for some federal agencies. And I want to be able to connect my IT operations directly to the outcomes that are going to be citizen-facing. I don't need to know, as a consumer of those two SaaS products, but because I can rely on an integration partner like SAIC to securely connect those two environments together, and to do so at that data-centric layer, so that you're kind of adhering to the principles and tenets of zero trust throughout. That ServiceNow doesn't have to trust Salesforce, Salesforce doesn't have to trust ServiceNow, because the way we integrate that at the data fabric level ensures data-centric security no matter how they're interconnected.
And if you, just to continue with a application like the Air Force has, or multiple applications, or the State Department, or any of them, besides the SaaS ones, they have their own applications. And they are migrating those to the cloud, in many cases refactoring them or otherwise optimizing them for cloud deployment. But then again, you still have the multiple cloud issue. So the opposite topic would be then, if I have an application that I own, that I've refactored for the cloud or optimized for the cloud, can I use that in two different commercial clouds, depending on my scaling needs or my geographic needs, whatever the case might be?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of that portability between cloud providers has really been realized, I'll say, over the past 5-6 years, even going back 8 years, to the advent of Kubernetes in terms of container orchestration platforms. So containers are a pretty old technology concept. You could go all the way back to Solaris Zones before they sold to Oracle. Even OpenBSD, they had a system called jails, which is a little kind of putting each compute into its own little jail. It sounds fun, doesn't it?
But especially in the open source kind of
absolutely,
world.
Absolutely. But it's really around how do you abstract the operating system as opposed to abstracting the hardware, to kind of, to your point, not care so much about the hardware, and how do you give that container runtime a secure envelope to run in, and then how do you orchestrate that for an enterprise? And so moving to more event-driven architectures or microservice architectures kind of coincided with the rise of containers and container orchestration, and Kubernetes really fit into that kind of niche, into being able to have that portability between cloud providers.
And let's get back to the survey that we mentioned. You surveyed the federal government. Who exactly did you survey? Was it DoD and civilian? And tell us what they said about the state of cloud adoption.
Yeah, it really spanned the entire gamut of the federal government, and it ranged from folks leading large cloud and I'll say transformative mission systems and programs, all the way up to C-level leadership across some federal organizations, and the real decision makers around policy and acquisition strategy as well. What some of the kind of macro trends that we saw is that almost 70% or more of the organizations saw themselves as multi-cloud organizations already, which was really buoyed our confidence that agencies are starting to appreciate that it's not a one-size-fits-all answer for them that's out there. No one cloud provider is going to give them everything that meets their diverse mission, and so they need this kind of heterogeneous ecosystem. Also from the standpoint, just in general, of generating competitive landscape, right? Not getting into a multi-cloud or a single cloud provider owning and having a monopoly over the entire landscape. The other kind of macro, when we look at DevSecOps cultural adoption, we saw two real macro trends there that the number wasn't nearly as high. So 70% of organizations said they were multi-cloud. Around 30% said that they were at some maturity level in regards to DevSecOps cultural adoption, as well as DevSecOps automation and getting the benefits and seeing the benefits tied to their organizational outcomes. And so that was an interesting element to unpack. And as we looked deeper down that DevSecOps avenue, we saw a lot of organizations were hindered in some of the analysis paralysis, that we call it, that comes with the wide variety of choice. I think Barry Schwartzer calls it the paradox of choice, and that it ties to even some of the base components of user experience design, and that the more choices you present to someone, it directly relates to the longer time it takes them to make a decision. And when you're inundated with, I've got this DevSecOps full platform from some of these vendors out here, versus I've got all these piece parts and you can put them together yourselves, and you've got industry in between that says I can do everything under the sun for you, it becomes really challenging for a federal organization to pick what's right for them. And that also kind of dovetails in, there's not one answer that's right for the entire organization. So how do you create an ecosystem that's tailorable but still meets the 80% mark? And that's where we see the federal government needing to focus next, is how do they take their multi-cloud posture and meet DevSecOps in an answer that meets the core of their mission, but still provides enough room to tailor to the bespoke mission needs.
Right, so the 70% that said they're in multi-clouds could mean they have an office automation component from one cloud vendor and something in another cloud, but that's not really getting to the full realization of this DevSecOps analysis and mission critical type of operation in the cloud.
Spot on, and that's where some of these more, I'll say, cross-organization multi-cloud vehicles are starting to emerge. So you see Cloud One was one we talked about earlier. It goes across 4 cloud providers all the way up through DoD secret level in terms of the data and systems that it's hosted and enabling. You have JWCC coming from DoD, so this is a DoD-wide vehicle for being able to order across those same 4 cloud providers that exist on Cloud One in order to facilitate the ease of acquisition, to try and remove some of those barriers in getting access to the right tool for the right job. And then you have organizations like Cloud One and NC on the Army side, and T-Cloud, for example, coming out of the Department of Treasury, that on top of that seamless acquisition strategy for getting at those cloud providers and their tools, you now have a secure governance and management layer to create this community of adoption to really drive towards the larger departmental needs and create economies of scale. That's the real kind of meat of it, is at a macro federal organization level, why adopt cloud? It's to take advantage of those economies of scale and drive those efficiencies, because there's an existential cliff coming in terms of congressional budgeting, right? There's legacy systems sprawled across the entire federal government, and the cost to sustain those systems and maintain those systems in their current form is eating up 90 to 92% of the entire IT budget across the federal government, leaving only 8% to innovate and compete. Now, for some organizations, that 8% is enough, but for most of the federal government organizations, we think Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Department of State, Treasury, these are global socioeconomic and geopolitical organizations that do have competitive nation states and do need to stay apprised, no different than any commercial company needs to stay viable.
Now, I want to get back to that point you made about analysis paralysis. Could be that agents are looking at cloud providers in terms of a stack of services or a stack of prices or what their locations are, all of these characteristics of clouds, and maybe overlooking the question of what do I want to do with this cloud, and then maybe asking an SAIC, all right, you're a great cloud broker in effect, if you will, or cloud integrator. Here's what I want to do. What's the best cloud for that? That would cut through a lot of that, I would think.
Yeah, so that ties directly to why we established the CloudScent solution set, right? That exploratory and analytic phase is key to not only understanding where you're at as an organization in terms of your IT portfolio and your data-centric security posture, but where do you need to go from a mission perspective so that all of your modernization and migration trends are all aimed at that North Star. I like to tell an anecdote, it's a Simon Sinek anecdote, so I'll just quote him, is that if you put 2 people in a room, the first person you say walk in a straight line, and you put a chair in their way, they stop dead in their tracks. But if you say walk in a straight line to the northeast corner of the room, and you put a chair in that person's way, they can move around the chair and continue in a straight line to the northeast corner. And the only difference is, one, you gave a vision of to where you want them to go, so they were able to overcome obstacles as they get along the way, which is kind of, it's a little cliche, a little trite, but it's a nice personification of what clouds can explore and the importance of that consultative partnership up front to help design where you're wanting to go with cloud. And then from that target, you can now backfill and distill which cloud providers are going to offer the right components to help make that a reality and cut through some of that analysis paralysis.
And draw the line for how sophisticated cloud maturity and DevSecOps relate. Because DevSecOps could occur in someone's laptop too.
Absolutely. That's one of my favorite things is automation is not new. Agile is we're at the 23-year point in terms of the Agile manifesto. DevSecOps itself.
And they still have the original website up too.
Exactly. Don't you love that? agilemanifesto.org for a shameless plug. But the concepts could have happened anywhere. Why they're tied, why they're moored so tightly to cloud, is cloud, the automation and elasticity of cloud, it kind of broke down the silos and barriers and it created a forcing function for organizations that were historically siloed to come together and work together on a shared kind of technology and language. When you look at infrastructure as code, configuration as code, even now software security policy as code, it allows a common language between traditional development and operations, and now with OSCAL and some of the emerging languages there, the security community, to leverage the cloud and not have any of the bureaucratic silos that used to live when there was a long tail procurement process to getting hardware, when there was a long tail sustainment process to maintaining hardware, real estate footprints in terms of renting spaces or buying spaces for physical data centers. The cloud abstracts all of that away.
And I would think that too, that if your data is all there as well, that is associated with applications, then the analytical part of applying AI to the data naturally should be in the cloud.
Absolutely, absolutely. And some of the, I'll say the compute power needed to run and train some of the models to really drive those beneficial outcomes are really only feasible in the cloud. If you think about, I need to train a model, it's going to take me 30 days, and the hardware that it would take to procure might cost $10 million because I'm buying it for a 5-year warranty, but I only need it for 30 days to train this model, do this experiment, see if this outcome is going to be mission impactful. The cloud is the only business model that creates that OpEx sort of construct to allow a R&D community or a test and evaluation community to do that sort of rapid experimentation with data. And then to your other point, the move to cloud, because you're not physically segregated. So you don't have this network-centric security kind of security blanket, if you will. You now have to, as a forcing function of moving to cloud, embrace data-centric security, which has the benefit of now that your security is at a data-centric level, you can apply models that data-centric security is enforced throughout. And so you not only get the power of elastic compute, but you get that data-centric security as part of your migration.
And we've been talking about development and test and AI and training. It would seem it's a natural jump from there to actually operating in the cloud, where you're generating more data and doing transactions and trying to keep customer experience levels up. That it would be a natural to just keep things in the cloud once you're there, and then rather than like download it all and run it locally.
Absolutely, yeah. It provides a unparalleled ability to have data centrally located, so you don't need multiple copies of it, which then, from an attack surface standpoint and security of your data, gives you a much stronger governance position to control that access on a transaction by transaction basis, as well as then support and get cloud, I'll call it cloud in a box to a degree, extended down as close to the problem as you need. So you see the cloud providers starting to meet the mission there as well, in seeing that not only do they need their CONUS, kind of the continental US hosted data, but you need the ability at the tactical edge for certain missions. When we think of DHS with CBP,
right. When
we think of the DoD in terms of the JADC2 mission areas, and what we're doing specifically, what SAIC is doing in partnership with the Air Force on cloud-based command and control, how do you have edge capability with the AI and ML decision advantage that the cloud provides, seamlessly integrated in a highly resilient network architecture to the full power of the globally available cloud, all the way up, not just impact level 5, which is national sensitive security data, but all the way up to secret, top secret, and SCI.
So this is why we're seeing the development of edge capabilities, edge computing capabilities, almost like you can pack a cloud in a box. It looks like a computing facility, but it has the cloud architecture. And it might not even be connected. It might be local, but when it touches the cloud again, it looks like the cloud.
Absolutely, and that kind of seamless transition or we'll call it graceful degradation of service when you're disconnected versus when you're connected, is a key aspect of bridging cloud to edge and vice versa. And so just foreshadowing a future survey, not only are we going to see AI, ML, DevSecOps, and cloud co-located for the foreseeable future, but you'll start to see edge kind of being a fourth technology layer there as well.
Yeah, because you still need distributed quality at times, just because you need it for whatever the austere environment might be, and connectivity and so forth.
Absolutely.
And if people want to read more about this survey, where do they go?
SAIC.com/cloud.
All right, an easy one to remember. And on that note, I want to thank you for being with us. So a lot to think about. Bob Ritchie is the Chief Technology Officer for SAIC. I'm Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search SAIC.